Hey guys, it's Dr. Hayes, and I'm here with the last video of our diversity unit. So I'm going to talk about some books that we haven't talked about yet and that you haven't even read for the class, but I usually bring these books to campus and go through a whole spiel in the classroom showing just sort of this last group of characters in our diversity unit before we move on. So I thought I would just do it here on a video and show you. Maybe it will sort of be interesting and entertaining and teach you something also. So it's basically three groups of diverse representation that I want to go through in this video. One is orphans or homeless or adopted characters, and one is characters with a disability and or mental illness of some kind, and the third one is LGBTQ representation in children's and young adult literature. I don't have as many on the children's side of that, but I'll talk about that a little bit. So the reason why I wanted to go through these in the diversity unit is because this whole unit we've been talking about non-standard representation in children's literature, and mostly it's been about race and religion. We've talked about African American, Asian American, Hispanic American, and we've talked about Jewish and Muslim, and that was just kind of scratching the surface, right? But those are all mostly ethnic and religious, non-normative, minority, if you will, representation in children's literature. And so there's lots of titles that I didn't even mention. I don't have a copy of them, or I'm either unaware of them, or some of you have brought up other things that I didn't even say either. So I just wanted to kind of give a sampling of the kinds of things that are out there, because having representation in these areas is important. That's one of the things we talked about at the beginning of the unit is who's the audience for these books, and what is their purpose, and is the purpose to have your representation on the page of that people group, or is it to be educational for the reader? So those are still considerations that we're going to have today with these groups. So the last group here is these are not things that are a religious decision or a ethnicity or race that the character is born into or that the author is born into. These are all lifestyle things. Now, the LGBTQ is something a lot of times that it's something that's inside of the character, much like being born black, right? It's very similar. Also, sometimes being born with a mental illness or disability is not something that's avoidable. Sometimes some of the circumstances that the characters endure are environmental, like if their parents are killed or something like that, and they have sort of these alternative, non-normative growing up experiences because of their sexual identity, their family demographic identity, a disability or mental illness that they have. So they're still considered in the minority status. So I didn't want to leave that group of people and characters and authors out of our discussion. So not to go on any more about that. So let's talk about children without parents. So you do have books about kids who are homeless who do have parents, like a homeless family. That is not as common. Actually, being an orphan is pretty common in children's literature. Especially children's adventure fiction or fantasy. If there's something dire or important happening in a young person's world, if they have parents, the parents are going to be the ones who are in charge. The parents are going to be the ones who step in. To be able to have the child character emerge and sort of step forward and take on their role as sort of the hero of the story, the parents have to be either absent or ineffectual in some way. Think of, say, Stranger Things. the kids all have parents, but their parents are completely clueless about what's going on, except for Will's mom, obviously, Winona Ryder's character. But they all have parents who are like, you going out to play? Okay, have fun. You know, like they're completely absent from the situation. So sometimes you have, in children's books, you have kids who are in charge of important things because the adults in their lives aren't paying attention. But a lot of times, the easiest way to make a kid be in charge or to step forward as a hero is to make them be an orphan or to be on their own for some reason. And so there's sort of this long tradition in children's literature of having no parents. It's just kind of a thing. It's not that unusual. Probably one of the earliest, it's not a children's book, but even, with Dickens, with like Oliver Twist, the famous, please sir, can I have some more? Like the famous orphan and his plight. Great Expectations, also Dickens. He was really had a heart for orphans and young children. So I have a collection of some books of sort of well-known orphans throughout children's literary history. The earliest one I have, y'all are gonna laugh right out the gate, but it's called Ragged Dick. So I'll wait. Get it out of your system. Okay, so it's Horatio Alger, and he actually wrote a lot of books about street children in London and New York. This one is set in New York, but like he had a lot of books about like New York and cities, like kids in the city and like scrappy kids. So Ragged Dick is actually set in New York, and that's the name of the character. That's what he goes by. His name's Richard, but people who named Richard used to go by Dick. And so, he was a boot black. So, like on the streets, this came out in 1868. Yeah, 1868. And so in the, 19th century, in the 1800s, businessmen on the street, there were young boys with like a wood box and a crate, a case of shoe shine, and would shine their shoes of the businessmen, right? And they would get tips. And it was mostly homeless boys running around doing that. And that's what Ragged Dick, he was a boot black. If you recall, Dickens, if you remember we talked about him, he worked in a blacking factory where they made the stuff, the blacking that goes on boots. So that's kind of a small world. But this is it's a coming of age novel with, basically he pulls himself up by his bootstraps, not, pun intended. And he sort of makes something of himself and is able to build up enough money to have an apartment, and he goes to Sunday school and learns to read, and it's this great rags to riches story. It's one of the earliest examples I have from the mid 1860s of this sort of orphan makes good kind of a novel, but it's certainly not the only one. It's just in my collection, it's the earliest one I have, and it's a good example of the kind of stories that there used to be. Another one we've already read a little bit of, Tom Sawyer. Tom Sawyer was an orphan. He lives with his Aunt Polly, if you recall. So he was adopted by a family member. That's pretty common. But he didn't have parents, so to speak. Another sort of domestic situation, and this is Huckleberry Finn. His father was abusive, and he was an abusive drunk. And so he was practically an orphan because the only parent he had was an abusive drunk. So both of the boys in Twain's classic Tom Sawyer are without parents. Aunt Polly tries to be his parent, but he considers himself to be, without authority. So Tom Sawyer is another famous orphan. We have Wizard of Oz, which we've already read. Dorothy is an orphan. She lives with her aunt and uncle. So she's been adopted by members of the family. So that's another sort of reality of the time. Just to keep us on our timeline, Ragged Dick was 1868, Tom Sawyer was 1871, this is 1900, so we're kind of skipping along here. Another example from 1903, if you've ever read or seen the movie A Little Princess, the Shirley Temple movie is probably the most well-known version of A Little Princess, but Frances Hodgson Burnett wrote it. She also wrote The Secret Garden. So if you're familiar with that story, which also has orphans in it, now that I'm thinking about it. But A Little Princess is Sarah Crew, the main character. Her father's a very wealthy general or captain. Captain Crew, yes. I was like, it's something. Yeah, on the back, he's a captain. And he is killed in battle. And so she becomes an orphan, and the whole book takes place in a girl's home, in an orphanage. So that's another famous orphan we've got. We have another one, Anne of Green Gables. This was a very important book for me growing up. I loved Anne of Green Gables. I read the whole series over and over and over. She's famously an orphan, and the story starts where she is being picked up and adopted by Marilla and Matthew Cuthbert, old maid and bachelor brother and sister, a brother and sister, old fuddy-duddy couple, I guess you'd say, adopt her, and she was supposed to be a boy to help them on their farm, and when he got to the train station, she was a girl, and he just kind of went with it, and she's a really eccentric figure, and she transforms their lives, and shenanigans ensue. So yeah, Anne of Green Gables is another sort of famous orphan. Something that maybe you're seeing, with all of these is that a lot of times in literature there's something sort of angelic about being an orphan. Something like, oh, bless their hearts, right? This sort of magical orphan can come along, and they have a heart of gold, and they can change they can melt all the hearts of the adults in the room, right? Oliver Twist was that way, which that's not a children's book, but anyway, it's the same way. Sarah Crew is that way. Dorothy, Ragged Dick, Anne of Green Gables. Maybe Tom Sawyer is a little bit different. You know, he's not quite so. He kind of causes heartache for all of the adults in his life, but you just kind of gotta love him, right? So you have this sort of trope of the kid without parents just kind of having this otherworldly pluck that makes them, they're survivors, right? So I don't know that that's necessarily a healthy depiction, because there are plenty of children who grow up without parents and they're devastated permanently. So, you know, I don't know that that's necessarily a very helpful trope to have. So I wanted to point out this is the kind of ways that orphans are being depicted in literature. I have more. James and the Giant Peach. He's famously an orphan, and his Aunt Sponge and Aunt Spiker adopt him to be basically their servant, and they mistreat him, and he escapes their abuse basically in this peach, right? And they get their comeuppance. So he's an orphan who his parents were killed by charging rhinos, is the story that he was told, but I think it was like a car accident or something. So James is another famous orphan. I pulled this one from my shelf mainly because the movie just came out last year, The House with a Clock in Its Walls, because it was the movie with Jack Black and Kate Blanchett, and it was really good. It was a really good movie. Way better than I thought it was going to be. Echo loved it. But John Bellairs, he wrote a bunch of different mystery novels, and this was one of them. And the whole thing starts with the main character coming to sort of be taken in by his uncle, who sort of adopts him, right? So he's sort of embarking on his own with being adopted by an eccentric family member, which kind of seems to be a theme. If you've read or seen this series, Molly Moon, are y'all familiar with the Molly Moon? I've got all of them. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 8. I've got 8 Molly Moons down there total. They made a movie of this one, The Incredible Book of Hypnotism. There was a movie of this Molly Moon that Echo absolutely loved, so I got the series for us to read. But the whole thing, Molly Moon's an orphan, and it takes place in an orphanage, and it's all the different kids in the orphanage, and sort of the mistreatment that's there and things. So that's a little bit more of a modern example of an orphan. One we already talked about too in the picture book unit is Hugo Cabret. The Invention of Hugo Cabret is the full title of the novel. But Hugo, he lives in the train station in London, and his father he and his father used to live up in the rafters in the clock, and his dad was the clock winder. Well, his dad passes and he doesn't tell anybody. Well, his dad never comes home, basically. They assume, I think he either abandoned him or passes on. And so Hugo continues his job because he doesn't want anybody to know that he's living up there by himself. So he is like a homeless orphan in this novel. So that's another more modern example of an orphan. We also have, I don't know if we talked about this in here. This is a Newbery winner, The Graveyard Book. This is Neil Gaiman. Neil Gaiman, who is famous for American Gods and Stardust and Coraline, among others. He wrote The Graveyard Book, which if you haven't read it, it's so good. The Graveyard Book is basically a gothic retelling of The Jungle Book. The characters are pretty much the same. The plot's the same. The chapter titles are even the same. All of the sort of episodes that happen in The Jungle Book happen in The Graveyard Book, except instead of set in India with a human Indian boy being raised by a panther and a bear and a snake, he is a human boy in, I think, New York, maybe. It's in modern times. I don't remember where, and he's being raised by a vampire and a ghost in a graveyard, and he lives in a crypt, and so all of the characters from the jungle and Jungle Book are supernatural creatures in the graveyard, and he can see them and stuff. So it's very good, but it's an orphan tale. I mean, Jungle Book's another example. Mowgli is an orphan and being raised by the jungle. I didn't even pull that one off the shelf. Another one that recently had a movie, If I Stay. I don't know if you can see that. If I Stay by Gail Forman, and there's the sequel, Where She Went, which is also very good. But If I Stay is about the girl who's a well-known, a gifted cellist. She plays the cello. This is me playing a cello. And she's in a car accident with her parents, and her parents are killed, and she's in a coma, and her leg is mangled, and she's in a coma, and the whole book takes place with her sort of spirit wandering around and looking at the aftermath of the accident, and she's deciding if she's gonna stay and go back into her body and live her life, or if she wants to go and pass on, right? So while she's in a coma. So that's why it's called If I Stay. It's so good. But it is about an orphaned teenager. And Where She Went is a few years later, once she's into young womanhood, and sort of the aftermath of her decision. Spoiler, she stays. And so it's very good. And it's not, you can see it's short. It's not a super long book. It's very, very good if you haven't read it. Another modern famous orphan is Aragon. He lives with his uncle and his cousin. And his uncle is killed pretty early on in the book, toward the beginning. And so he and his cousin are both orphaned at that point. He was an orphan already, but he's fully orphaned when his uncle's killed. And so then he has to set out on his adventure and become, the hero of the story. But he's like a teenager when that happens. So he's an orphan. And then probably, I say the best for last, the most famous orphan of all. Who do you think it's going to be? You can guess. I'll give you a chance. Harry Potter! The most famous orphan that there is in modern children's literature. Harry Potter. It was adopted by his cruel aunt and uncle. That's the theme, obviously. And he's the orphan, but he's the chosen one who has to run off and be the hero, much like Aragon. Not in children's lit. Another example is Luke Skywalker. He's sort of a famous orphan who has to run off and be the hero once his aunt and uncle are killed, and we know who his parents are. So I guess he's not technically an orphan. He thinks he is, but we find out that he's not an orphan because of Darth Vader. But his life has been lived as if he's an orphan. So yeah, I had Harry Potter as the last example. So as you can see, just with my sampling that I have, that sort of this heroic orphan, homeless child character is kind of a trope. It's a trope in children's literature. And again, I think part of that is practical reasons. if there are adults in their lives, how are the children going to emerge as the heroes of the story, right? So the adults have to either be corrupt or absent or ineffectual in some way or dead. That's really your options. So, that's why it's a thing. So, I mean, I don't know if we're talking about representation, we're talking about children who are orphans who are reading this literature. I don't know. I haven't decided if that's a positive depiction or not. You know, if that cliche or that archetype of the heroic orphan is harmful or if it's helpful. I'll let you think about that too. The next group I want to talk about is characters who have some sort of a disability, physical disability or mental disability. I don't have all of them. Oh, I almost forgot an orphan. Frozen. The story Frozen has, Elsa and Anna, their parents die when they're young, and that's a movie, I know, but films a lot of times are included in the realm of children's literature, so I don't want to leave them out. And fairy tales, there are a lot of examples of orphaned children in fairy tales. Probably the one that comes to mind the most is maybe Snow White counts. I don't know if the evil queen, if that's her stepmother, maybe. I guess there are a lot of characters in fairy tales that have evil parents or one evil parent or something like that. More so than being orphaned. Okay, so anyway, characters where there's a mental or physical disability. For this collection, the earliest one I have is Louisa May Alcott's Little Men. This is the sequel to Little Women. In Little Women, you kind of had a character with Beth, who got scarlet fever as a young girl, and so was an invalid and sick for most of her life until she died. I wanted to mention Little Men because Little Men is set in a school. So at the end of Little Women, Jo gets the school, and she and Friedrich are going to set up a school. Well, Little Men is all about the school. And one of the characters has I don't know they never say, but he's slow. I don't know that they would have had categories for like various learning disabilities and mental disabilities back then, but they talk about how he's slow. But what's great about the book is that the school accommodates his learning style, and like they give him tasks that are appropriate to his abilities, but that will still edify him and have him learn something from it, right? And the other students in the school are very patient and protective of this student who is mentally, deficient. I don't know what you'd call it, but it's actually pretty encouraging. Little Men was published in 1871, so it's like the earliest example I have of a book that was published with if you don't think of Beth and Little Women, which was in the 1860s, but yeah, so that's like an early example. Little Men. I also have The Little House on the Prairie. I just pulled the first one, Little House in the Big Woods, because Mary, the older sister, is blind. So her blindness is a big plot point in the novel, how they have to raise money for her to go to school and, do things around the house to accommodate her physical disability where she can't see. So, I know when I was growing up and reading about Mary being blind, it was a huge, sort of deal for me to be exposed to that as a part of their lives. And it was as much a part of their lives as keeping the fire going and taking care of the animals and sewing and washing. Helping Mary was like part of it. So I wanted to bring up Little House on the Prairie as an example as well. This is a Newbery Medal winner, Johnny Tremain. I don't know if y'all have ever heard of this. It was published in the 1940s. Oh, Little House on the Prairie was in the 1930s. 20s and 30s is when those books were published, by the way. Johnny Tremain, I read this book in middle school. It was published in the 1940s, but it's a period piece. It's a historical fiction set during the American Revolution, like colonial times. And the main character, Johnny Tremain, he is disfigured. He was apprenticing under a silversmith and got a really bad burn that disfigured his hand. And so, but he's like sort of this hero of this story. You can kind of see he's in this very heroic pose, right? Riding the horse on the beginning. So, I think it's a very important representation that he didn't start the book disfigured. He became disfigured in the course of the narrative, and then he emerged and overcame his disability to become like the hero of the story. So I think that's sort of significant, especially it was very 1940s sensibility, right? Like we were in World War II at the time. I think 1943 is when it came out, right in the middle of World War II. The sort of reminding Americans of who we are and what we're capable of, right? And it got the Newbery Medal. Like it's very much a portrait of like where we were at the time. Very interesting. And there were probably a lot of people returning home from war who were maimed, and this book was a way to show that they were still capable of greatness. I have another one. I don't know if you've read Harriet the Spy. I think this came out in the 60s. Yeah, 1960s. Harriet the Spy. I think there was a movie made out of it. Harriet's disability is a little bit, it's kind of invisible. She has, I don't think that they ever say, but it would be like a social disorder, or maybe even like bipolar, or some sort of a extreme social anxiety. But she keeps a journal, and she has these sort of quirky compulsions that she has to do to sort of cope, and she ends up at one point toward the end, it kind of reaches a climax, and she ends up going to a therapist. So I mean that's pretty revolutionary for a young character to be going through those things in a book in the 1960s. So I think Harriet the Spy sort of stands out in those ways because of that. Like it was very open about how she wasn't okay, and like the adults in her life recognized that she wasn't okay, and they got her somebody to talk to, and that's important. Harriet the Spy. Another one I have, 1970, E.B. White, the Trumpet of the Swan. E.B. White is most famous for Charlotte's Web and also Stuart Little, but he also wrote this one, The Trumpet of the Swan. And this is about a disabled swan. This trumpeter swan is the breed, and it has this sort of distinct trumpet sounding honk that it does, and that's its mating call, and that's how it impresses the females of the species to get a mate. Well, it's about this swan who's born without a honk. Like he's disabled, he's mute, right? Which is very similar to Mary being hearing impaired. This swan is not hearing impaired, vision impaired. Sorry, Mary in Little House on the Prairie is vision impaired. This swan is mute, and so it's all about this boy who befriends him, and like they get him like basically a prosthetic. They get him like a trumpet instrument that he sort of uses to impress the most beautiful swan who he has a crush on, and she ends up falling in love with him too. So it's about this sort of disabled swan who gets the prosthetic, and he gets the girl. Basically, it's very adorable, but it's about a character with a disability. Similarly, another Newbery winner, The Tale of Despero. This had a movie made about it. Despero, Kate DiCamillo. I just love her. I've seen her speak live, and I met her, and she signed a bunch of my books. Was this one of them? Yeah, this is the one she signed for Sarah, and she was just really great. But Despero sort of is famous for not having a tail. His tail was cut off, and so he has all of these things that he does. Like in here, you can see he's tied a needle to him to be like his tail, and so his lack of a tail is sort of a it's kind of mark of shame for a mouse to not have a tail, and it's a big part of their identity in this book, the culture that's been established in this book. And so he, it's discouraging for him to be part of it, but then he overcomes and he tries to compensate with different prosthetics and stuff. So it's an interesting thing where there's a character, an animal who needs enhancement. On that same note, while we're talking about animals with disabilities with enhancement, How to Train Your Dragon is another example of both main characters of that series have a prosthetic. The dragon, Toothless, has a prosthetic from the beginning. He's missing part of his tail, and Hiccup makes him a prosthetic. Well, then Hiccup loses a foot, and so for all the rest of the movies in the series and the TV show and books that came out of it, Hiccup is an amputee. Like, he has a prosthetic, and it's just a part of his idea. It doesn't diminish his abilities at all. And so that's, I saw a great presentation at Children's Lit Conference last year about How to Train Your Dragon and the sort of how they get disability right, like the depiction of someone with a prosthetic, how they get it right. So while we were talking about, a tail that needed a mouse that needed a prosthetic for his tail, I thought I mentioned How to Train Your Dragon. Another book that I just absolutely love this book. It won the National Book Award. I would say that it's maybe middle school age or maybe high school age. It's got some heavy stuff in it, so maybe high school, but I think middle school could probably handle it. It's called When Zachary Beaver Came to Town, and it's about this small town and these boys who live in this town, and this trailer arrives in the town, and the guy pulling the trailer moves into a hotel or something. I don't remember exactly, but turns out inside the trailer is a humongous obese boy, Zachary Beaver, who cannot get out of the trailer. He lives in there. He's hundreds of pounds. And turns out that this man, I don't think it was his father, maybe it was an uncle or something, was his caretaker, and he takes him from town to town as sort of this spectacle. And so people come and look in the window, and he's like a freak, go see the freak, right? And so it's about these two boys who befriend him and sort of treat him with dignity. And that's the main plot. There's also, it's set during it came out during or right after Desert Storm, like the Iraq War in the 90s, but it's set sort of historical fiction during the Vietnam or maybe the Korean War. I forget which one it was. It doesn't say on the back. But it's one of those where it's clear, all the stuff they're talking about the war, and one of the the main character, his brother doesn't come home. Right, they get a telegram that he is, has been killed in battle. But it's, even though it's in the, set in the past, it's obviously talking about the Desert Storm. But it's just so interesting. If you're looking for something else to read, When Zachary Beaver Came to Town, it's really good. I don't know how else to explain it. We talked about this one a little bit already when we did fairy tales, but the Cinder series, the Lunar Chronicles series, Cinder, she is a cyborg, so she has a prosthetic robotic leg, and that's a big part of her identity and who she is, and having to accommodate her prosthetic, and has outgrown the prosthetic that she currently has, and she doesn't have the money to replace it, so she has an ill-fitting prosthetic. And the book sort of contemplates the plight of someone with a disability who needs an accommodation, who needs a disability but can't afford it, and they just have to kind of make do. That's a really interesting part of the book. We've talked about the Lunar Chronicles in class already, so I won't go into too much detail about that. Another one you're probably all familiar with, Percy Jackson, the Lightning Thief. He sort of famously has dyslexia. He has a learning disability where he can't read, and you come to find out that that's sort of part of his heritage, part of his birthright, is that he can't, the English is hard for him to read, but that is sort of a feature. He's the hero of the series, but he has this sort of feature that sort of holds him back in human society, right? He has this severe learning disability, and it has affected his ability to have success in the human world until he figures out what his lineage is and figures out his success. So Percy Jackson, dyslexia. Another famous recent example is Wonder. They made a movie, Julia Roberts was in the movie, and Owen Wilson, Owen Wilson was in it. And it was about a boy who was born extremely disfigured and has multiple surgeries, and it's all about his experiences in school and being bullied, but also making friends and coming sort of to terms with his identity. And it's just very, very good. Echo read this. A lot of elementary school kids read it, and I think he's in 5th grade. 5th or 6th grade is what Augie, the main character, is in. I don't remember exactly which. I think it's 5th grade. And so that's a lot of schools are having kids read it to sort of teach them how to interact with someone who's different, like in their school environment. Very good though. I have a couple of graphic novels. This one I got for Echo when she got braces. Echo had braces all last year, and she had them for about a year and a half. And so I got her this graphic novel about a girl in high school who has to get braces. And it's all about, like, she goes and it's her, like, you can see she's getting the impressions done, and she kind of spits out the impression. It's all about her having to have braces, and, there's, talking to boys and sort of being self-conscious about it. And look, she gets this retainer where she has a couple teeth missing. It's pretty great. Like, so I got this book for Echo to read whenever she got her braces, but it's about sort of going through, if you have, but this character didn't just need braces, she needed like a prosthetic for her 2 front teeth as well. So it was really good. Another graphic novel that I just absolutely love, it was a Newbery Honor. I think it should have won, but it's called El Defo. Let me let you see that really close. El Defo. And so the main character is this bunny rabbit who has hearing aids. I don't know if you can see, she's wearing these hearing aids, and then she wears the little receiver around her neck. And it's all about sort of her experiences in school wearing these hearing aids. And she has this sort of imaginary life where she has made up this superhero of herself, El Defo, right? Who, like, how would El Defo handle this situation, right? And so she sort of, in various circumstances where she's uncomfortable, she imagines that El Defo comes in. Right, here's a page where you can see she's imagining, an El Defo has shown up, right, and is handling the situation. So she kind of turns it into something that she takes control over. There's a really funny scene where it's embarrassing for her, but it's supposed to be funny also, where for her, the way her hearing aid works, it's supposed to be set like back in the 70s, I think, when technology wasn't very advanced, but she would wear this apparatus, kind of like a Walkman, like headphones in her ears, and wear this receiver like on her person, and then her teachers would wear this like microphone around their neck like a necklace, and so when they were talking, it would go into that microphone and it would communicate with her hearing aids, and she could hear it. They're talking, and there's a funny scene where like her gym teacher forgets he's wearing it and goes to the bathroom, and nobody else hears him in the bathroom, but she does, and her hearing aid is, she's so embarrassed, so there's like things like that. But there's a picture in the back of the author from elementary school, like with her hearing aid wires. It just kind of acknowledges the awkwardness of it, but also normalizes it as sort of something that you can endure and participate in. I have some picture books now. Madeline we already talked about, but I brought in Madeline because she, the sort of very encouraging, awesome scene where Madeline has to get her appendix out, and she's showing all the girls her scar, and how she's super proud of her scar and her surgery. And all the girls are like, at the end, the last pictures, they're all crying, and the Mother Superior's like, why are you crying? She's like, we want a scar, you know, like they want to be like her. So I put that in this stack because of that. I have a few picture books here. I know we're running a little long, but we'll get there. I have a few picture books here of characters with disabilities. Susan Laughs is one. So you get through the whole thing, and it's all about these actions that Susan does. Susan laughs. She sings. So it's, you see all these pictures, and it's different things she does. See that? She's in the bath. She's on the merry-go-round. She spins. She splashes. She's right, she's wrong, she's weak, she's strong. She looks like showing her during her math homework. All these different things, but then you get to the end, and only when you get to the very last page do you realize that she is in a wheelchair. Because all of those activities that she does are not defined by her disability, right? Like all the pictures show her, and so it's one of those when you get to the end, you're like, oh! And you have to go back through and verify that none of the things she's doing show her standing up or show her, walking or anything like that. And so it's this very much empowering book about how her life is so full and rich, and oh yeah, she sits in a wheelchair, right? Some of the time. So I really love that book, Susan Laughs. This one is another one, just because. And it is about a brother and a sister. The sister is in a chair, and it's all about her and her brother, and they do make-believe, and it's all about the sort of make-believe games they play to incorporate her disability into their games. There's more depictions of the wheelchair in this one than in the Susan Laughs. This one they're imagining it's a rocket ship, like on the cover. Let's see. They're reading in bed. This is them cuddled up, asleep, and imagining all the fun stuff that they did. So it's just kind of it's a way that this brother and sister sort of are able to still have a fulfilling relationship, even though the sister's in a chair. I have these other two books that I got. My friend has Down syndrome, and my brother is autistic. So the audience for these books are more not readers who do have Down syndrome or do have autism, but for sort of typically brained children who don't have these things, who the adults in their lives want them to learn about it, right? So it's explaining all about, it was sort of a gentle stories that depict characters who are describing what it's like. Like this one's all about what it's like to have a friend who has Down syndrome. So she's talking all about it. And this is a counselor at a day camp who brings her friend with Down syndrome to the camp for the day so that the campers can like meet her and so that she can have fun. And it says she's Tammy was rather slow at some of the sports activities that we did, like running, races, and tag, but she was good at some other things. She was really good at arts and crafts, especially pottery. She could take a blob of clay and mold it into anything, even pretty plates and vases. And when it was time to show our talents at the show, I got very shy and wanted to quit, but Tammy made me feel brave and didn't let me give up. Right? It's sort of a depiction of her doing the pottery. And so it's sort of a way to explain, people with Down syndrome are usually very dexterous, and a lot of times they're double jointed. Maybe not all the time, but that's a common feature of someone with Down syndrome, is being double jointed and flexible and dexterous. And so that's, it's just kind of an interesting way to expose somebody. And then the autistic one is the same. So it's about an older brother whose younger brother has autism. He's explaining, do you have any brothers or sisters? I do. I have one brother. His name's Billy, and he has autism. Billy and I have fun together. Most of the time we get along, but I don't like it when he freaks out, especially in front of my friends or the other kids at school. So, I mean, it's very honest about the challenges of the experience, and it shows Billy throwing a tantrum and like sort of having a extreme freak out about a situation, and then it shows the brother of like how he how the kids sort of are laughing and make fun of him, but then and how the brother has sort of learned to love him through it. And it's talking then it shows people with autism who are doing and accomplishing different things, athletes, artists, you know, people, musicians. So it's very positive. It's sort of this very positive depiction, and you know, showing him sort of being, you know, accomplishing things. And you know, okay, so here's one. It talks about one of the characters, Mrs. Smitty, talked a lot about what it meant to have autism. She said that some autistic kids might have trouble doing what their teachers or parents ask them to do, and other kids might get frustrated and upset really quick when something changes, just like Billy's row of cookies. Like he, you know, if something's out of order, or if like the plan is not what they thought it was going to be. Most kids with autism like to do things alone, and because they have trouble starting a conversation with others, it's not always easy for them to make friends. Others have trouble learning things like reading and writing and math. Billy needs some extra help, so he has a special teacher who stays with him in class and helps him when he needs it. So this is just a sort of very frank but gentle but positive education for you know, readers who don't have this particular disability, but they want to be exposed to it in some way. This is another one. I have a couple more. Daniel Tiger, Daniel's new friend. Daniel has a friend who has crutches, and so it teaches sort of the etiquette of interacting. Like, it's okay to comment, but don't bump into them. Like, it talks about not bumping into someone who has crutches, and ask their permission before you just touch their prosthetic or their crutches. You know, so it kind of goes through and teaches a little bit of the etiquette of interacting with someone who has. It would apply to crutches, a wheelchair, or, you know, any sort of a prosthetic or anything, a brace of any kind. The rules still apply. Another one. This is a little bit more of a intentionally educational book. Don't Call Me Special, and it's about all different kinds of disabilities, and it explains what they are. It explains sort of the ways that they are that certain disabilities must need to be accommodated. And this has different ones, like physical ones, mental ones, social ones, and but it, you know, again, it's very positive, like it says, and with a little extra help, children with disabilities can learn and grow and do things they want to, just like everybody else, right? So it's kind of a educational book. There's lots of books like that, but I just got that one as an example. This is the last picture book of this I'll show. Is Buddy, the First Seeing Eye Dog. And it's, you know, it's an easy reader version, but it's all about the story of this dog who was sort of the first one who helped pilot the training program for the seeing eye dog industry, right? That's even a thing. And so it's sort of history, and like medical history, as well as sort of a cool story about an animal. And I think that I really like that one. Okay, I know we've been going for a while, and y'all are bearing with me, so if you needed to take a break, you can. But I have a few more books to show you from the LGBTQ stack. I don't have as many of these because there frankly aren't as many. I just have a few. And there are very few books for young children that feature LGBTQ characters or situations. And mostly it's for teens. Lately in the past, I would say 10 to 15 years, we've had way more popularity with LGBTQ representation in teen lit, and even in children's lit. Like, I don't have these books, but there are books where there are a few picture books where they're like, Johnny has two daddies, or, you know, something like it's the child has same-sex parents, or, you know, something like that. Recently there was a book about the same-sex male couple penguins at the Pennsylvania Zoo. I think it was in Philadelphia Zoo. is the zoo they were at. And it was a couple. It was a male penguins couple, and there was a picture book, and that was a real life thing. And there was a picture book about them. I don't have it. I want it, but I don't have it. I just always keep forgetting to get it. And so there's a few books. I don't have any of them, but there are a few books like that with characters who have, same-sex parents, or there's a same-sex couple in them at some point for younger readers. I showed you a couple books already this semester when we did fairy tales. We talked about Ash, which is a lesbian retelling of Cinderella. I showed you my The Sleeper and the Spindle, the Neil Gaiman lesbian retelling of Sleeping Beauty. I showed you those, but I have a few others. We've talked about the Mortal Instruments so much in this class already, but we cannot mention LGBT issues without talking about Alec and Magnus, Malik as the fandom calls them, the couple. One of the most well-known, functional, healthy, great examples of a young same-sex couple that I can think of in YA literature is Magnus and Alec in the Mortal Instruments. Toward the end in the series after that, the Dark Artifices, I think, there's also a poly couple. There's a girl with two boys, and they have a polyamorous triad toward the end of the Dark Artifices series. So that's interesting, and it's very well done. Honestly, it's very well done. So that's something that's in there as well. The one book I do have that's for kids is Perez Hilton. If you remember Perez Hilton, I don't know if you're a little too young, but Perez Hilton, that's him. He was a celebrity blogger. He was one of the first people who was internet famous. Like, he was one of the first people to use the internet to get famous. And his signature was that he had pink hair. And so this book is The Boy with the Pink Hair. And in this book, he was born with it. So it's all about him being born with pink hair and how it's this thing he couldn't help. He was born that way. Even though some families laughed at him, his parents were very accepting of him. And this boy with the pink hair was bullied in school, but he had a skill. He loved to bake, right? And so there's this whole plot where he saves the school. There's some event, he bakes all their food, like there's some malfunction, and he saves the day with his skill. And so then everybody learns to accept him for who he is. It's a very thinly veiled metaphor, for being born homosexual. Perez Hilton is an out homosexual. So, I mean, it's a very thinly veiled metaphor. That's obviously what this book is about. But, yeah. So, I mean, it's under the surface in this picture. But this is the closest thing I have that would be an LGBT book for, like, young readers. Another example is Frozen. For young readers, again, Frozen. I don't know if you've come across this reading, but a lot of scholars are convinced that Elsa is a lesbian. That's not, that's kind of been in pop culture, and how, she was born with this power, this thing inside of her, and her parents raised her to think it was something she should be ashamed of, like conceal, don't feel, don't let them know, that kind of a thing. She won't be able to do her job, and she won't be respected in her community if anybody finds out that she was born that way, right? So she hides it and keeps it inside, and then when she finally learns to let it go, right, she has to leave her family behind. She talks about, I'm alone now, but I'm alone and free. I can be who I want to be. And she has this sort of sexual awakening during that song. Her hair comes down. Her dress splits up the side. She's kind of sashaying at the end. If you haven't watched it recently, at least just watch that song, the Let It Go song. She has this sort of awakening, and she's very much... no love interest, nothing, no prince, no nothing. So a lot of people are convinced that she's, that's just sort of a metaphor for a lesbian coming out story. I do have a few books for teens that have been, just as an example, one of the earliest ones that I have is Annie on My Mind, Nancy Garden, and it's about two girls who go to two different schools in New York. One of them goes to a fancy boarding school, and one of them goes to like a poor public school, sort of in a bad neighborhood. And they have this romance, and they have one of the teachers at one of the schools is also a lesbian, and sort of mentors them, right? And so they're able to have this love connection, I guess you could say. And they get, when their parents find out, they get in trouble, and like it's like threatened to be expelled from the school. It came out in 1982, so it's kind of, it was like an early on example of you know, a same-sex young teenage romance. So that's one that I have. I have Jacqueline Woodson, who I talked about with the African American lit. She wrote If You Come Softly and Feathers, and Brown Girl Dreaming is the one I showed you about that won like every award. Well, these two, let's see, From the Notebooks of Melanin Sun and The House You Pass on the Way. Both of these have, one of them is about like a boy whose mother comes out. That's this one. A boy whose mother comes out to him when he's a teenager, and sort of how he deals with that. And then this one, I think it has a trans character. I'm pretty sure I haven't read this one. I've read this one, but I haven't read this one. And it has a trans character. I'm pretty sure that's what it is. But there's a couple, and so these are African American and LGBT. I have a few others. Let's see. Male, Female, or None of the Above is about a transgender character. Yeah, so this is a girl who's intersex. I was like, I need to get the term right. She has she's intersex, so she has a female on the outside, but she has chromosomes and boy parts on the inside, so she's both. And so it's like her journey for she's none of the above. Like, that's what, what that is about. Very interesting. Luna, National Book Award finalist, an honor one, not the winner, but it's about a transgendered character. Very well respected, good book. Then I had to show you David Levithan. This is just an example, boy meets boy. It's kind of the classic example of gay teen romance, boy meets boy. David Levithan is sort of the rock star of LGBT teen lit. Him and this other author, her name is Rainbow Rowell. I don't have any of her books in hard copy, but Rainbow Rowell is another author who is very well respected and has written lots of books of LGBT teen romance. But David Levithan and Rainbow Rowell are kind of the big names. David Levithan and John Green actually co-wrote a book together called Will Grayson, Will Grayson. And it's about two boys named Will Grayson in Chicago who don't know each other, but their lives kind of get mixed up with each other. One of them is straight. One of them is a closeted gay teenage boy, and the other one is straight, but his very best friend is an out and about fabulous gay boy. And so they kind of, their lives intersect, but they both have the exact same name. But anyway, David Levithan is a big name, and Boy Meets Boy was kind of his flagship book. And then I'll end with Becky Albertalli's beloved Simon versus the Homo Sapiens Agenda. It was made into the movie last year, the year before, Love, Simon, that was in the theater. And they didn't name it the weird title from the book, but it's based on this book, Love, Simon, the movie, which was so good. It was so good. So if you saw Love, Simon, it's also, the main character is a gay boy who is sort of outed by accident, by his friends and through like an anonymous pen pal online. But it's very good. That's just a drop in the bucket of the kinds of books that, these are all within like the last maybe 10 years, I guess. Other than Annie on My Mind, the one that one is from the 80s. It's very much ahead of its time. But in the last 10, maybe 15 years, there's been this explosion of LGBTQ plus teen selections that it's more and more and more not just it's accepted culture. It really, with the legalization of gay marriage, that's sort of when the floodgates open and people are like, oh, we can write about this now. This is a hot cultural item. People care. People want to know. There have been, gay people forever, but it's just recently being a thing that is accepted in the broader culture to be represented in art and on television and movies and books and things like that. So we're kind of witnessing the beginnings, kind of like if we had been alive in the 60s and 70s, we would witness the beginnings of African American and other sort of brown minorities being represented on paper for the first time, on the page for the first time. We're in a point in history where we're witnessing LGBTQ characters being represented on the page for the first time in a positive, uplifting way. So, exciting. Congratulations, us. I am sorry this video is an hour. Hopefully you found it very interesting. Hopefully you can put it on and you've been doing other stuff. When I send this in the email, I'll be sure to mention, hey, this video is a little bit long, so maybe take a break during it, get a snack, or put it on in the background and do other things. That's perfectly fine with me. But I wanted to end our diversity unit talking about some of these other types of books, and maybe in the Discord on Thursday we can mention them, or even going forward, if they come up. There's no rules about this, we're flying by the seat of our pants with this whole online thing. So hopefully you found this interesting, and if there's ones I didn't mention or that you can tell me about, definitely let me know, like either just in the Discord or in an email or something, if there's ones you like that I didn't mention in any of these categories. And if not, I will see you guys on Thursday.